My name is Karen, 32 years old, a part-time chef and freelance illustrator. My husband, Daniel, and I have been married for almost 4 years. If someone asked how my marriage was, I'd say it was fine. Not bad, not amazing, just fine. But there's one thing I've always believed in. In marriage, respect is non-negotiable. And I used to think Daniel understood that. Until that night. That evening, I hosted a small dinner at home, inviting my in-laws over. Nothing special, just an ordinary Saturday night. But I wanted to create a warm family atmosphere. I spent the whole morning preparing everything myself. Herb-roasted chicken, garlic butter mashed potatoes, cherry tomato salad, crispy toast, and lemon cheesecake for dessert. The kitchen was filled with the smell of butter, and I placed each plate on the table like it was a grand celebration. I didn't do it because anyone forced me. I genuinely enjoy making the home feel cozy, love seeing people happy, but turns out my kindness had been taken for granted. Daniel's family arrived on time. My father-in-law, Bruce, was the type of man who seemed stuck in another era, spoke loudly, always acted like his opinion was law. My mother-in-law, Linda, was gentle and quiet. Daniel's younger brother, Kyle, came with his wife, Natalie. She was soft-spoken, always had a forced smile, like she didn't dare show her real emotions. When I stepped out of the kitchen, holding the last plate, my own portion, everyone was already seated at the table. I placed the plate in front of my chair, smiled, and was about to sit down. But before I could do that, a hand reached out. Bruce, my father-in-law, didn't hesitate. He grabbed my plate as if it belonged to someone else, then handed it to Kyle. "Women eat after men," he said, like it was just the natural order of things. I froze, thinking he was joking. But no, he was dead serious. Kyle nodded in thanks and started eating like nothing happened. Linda stared silently at the table. Natalie frowned slightly but said nothing. And Daniel, my husband, just looked at me and shook his head slightly. "It's tradition," he murmured, as if explaining it made the disrespect disappear. The room suddenly felt cold, even though the fireplace was glowing. No one asked if I was hungry. No one offered me another plate. I said nothing. I just stood there for a few seconds, trying to swallow the anger rising inside, then quietly sat down in the empty chair with no food in front of me. I didn't eat. I didn't smile. I didn't join in their lively conversations. I just sat there, listening to the sound of forks and knives against porcelain, smelling the delicious food I'd spent all day preparing, and feeling every heavy heartbeat in my chest. No one asked why I wasn't eating. Daniel laughed loudly at something Kyle said, as if this dinner was some heartwarming family moment. I sat there, silent like a piece of furniture. I used to think my husband was different from his family. I used to think that as long as he wasn't like them, everything would be okay. But that night, I realized something. Silence is a form of complicity. I didn't make a scene. I didn't argue or fight back right then and there. I didn't want to give them an excuse to call me too sensitive or overreacting. Instead, I started planning. A plan they would never see coming. And it would begin the following Sunday. A day after that silent dinner, I sent a group text to my in-laws. "Next Sunday, 6 p.m., I'm inviting everyone over for dinner. I have a surprise I want to share." Daniel looked at me in surprise when he saw the message. "You sure? You didn't seem happy last week." I smiled gently, turning the coffee cup in my hands. "I just feel like I still owe your family a proper dinner." He nodded, looking relieved. As for me, I began preparing for a dinner none of them would ever forget. I planned the menu like I was hosting a high-end banquet. Black pepper beef tenderloin, butter garlic steamed lobster, bacon-wrapped asparagus, creamy mashed potatoes, and vanilla panna cotta with fresh strawberry sauce for dessert. Every dish was carefully selected to create a symphony of flavors. I bought fresh flowers, scented candles, even embroidered napkins. This dinner wasn't just a meal, it was a statement. On Sunday evening, the house was filled with candlelight and the rich aromas from the kitchen. Everything was so perfect that Bruce, my father-in-law, walked in and blurted out, Looks like a 5-star restaurant this time. I just smiled, saying nothing. They didn't know that this time the roles were about to reverse. After some polite greetings, Bruce, Kyle, and Daniel quickly pulled out chairs to sit down as usual. I watched as the three of them reached for their utensils, then stepped forward with 3 prepared plates. But instead of placing them in front of the men, I walked past them and served Linda, my mother-in-law, Natalie, Kyle's wife, and myself. "Women eat first," I said, my voice soft as a breeze, but sharp enough to cut the tension in the room. The entire table went silent. Bruce raised an eyebrow as if he couldn't believe his ears. Kyle glanced around, waiting for someone to correct me. Daniel paused mid-pour with the water pitcher. "What did you say?" Daniel asked, eyes wide. I set my plate down in front of me, placed my napkin on my lap, and smiled at him. "It's tradition, right? Women eating after men is just one part of it. Tonight we're starting a new part." Bruce pushed his chair back slightly, jaw tight. "We don't do silly things like this." I cut into the tenderloin, chewing slowly. "Silly? Then why didn't anyone speak up last week when my plate was taken from me?" No one answered. Natalie glanced at me, then quietly at Kyle. Linda blinked rapidly, but for the first time, she picked up her fork without looking to Bruce for a signal. Daniel exhaled and set his glass down. "Karen, you're making everyone uncomfortable." I turned to him, still calm. "I was uncomfortable last week too, Daniel." But I didn't say anything. I just sat there, watching everyone eat the meal I cooked, while I was treated like I didn't exist. So, tonight, we're trying something new. The air in the room grew thick. But then Natalie, who always avoided eye contact with her husband, let out a small laugh, a real one. She looked at me with quiet gratitude. The dinner continued, with the 3 women enjoying their food while the 3 men sat awkwardly. Kyle muttered something about childish games, but no one responded. I ate slowly, savoring each bite of the creamy sauce on my tongue, feeling the quiet shift of power in that familiar dining room. When I took my last bite, I set down my fork, dabbed my mouth with a napkin, and stood up. "Wonderful dinner. Now it's time for the next tradition." Bruce frowned. "What now?" I turned to the sink full of dishes. "Since the women cooked, the men wash." Kyle burst out laughing, thinking I was joking. But I didn't laugh. Neither did Linda or Natalie. The 3 of us quietly stood up, leaving the table behind. Daniel looked around like he was searching for an escape route, but there was no one to save him this time. He sighed, then stood up. "I'll get started." I watched him, saying nothing. In his eyes, I saw something change. Not anger, but realization, and maybe a bit of newfound respect. As Linda, Natalie, and I poured tea, I felt a small spark of hope stir in my chest. This dinner wasn't just a little stunt. It was a reminder. Everyone deserves to be treated fairly, even in their own kitchen. That night, after everyone had left, the house was wrapped in an odd silence. The sink was clean, the tablecloth neatly folded, but the air between Daniel and me was far from tidy. He sat at the dining table, a glass of water in hand, eyes fixed on the space ahead like he might find some answers there. I stood in the kitchen drying the last glass, then set it down with a soft clink. Quiet, but enough to make him look up. "What's going on, Karen?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I turned around, arms crossed. "What do you mean, Daniel?" "The dinner, that performance you put on. You made my whole family uncomfortable." I let out a dry chuckle, not from amusement. "Oh, and what about last week? When my plate was taken right in my own home, when no one said a word, not even you. When I had to sit and watch everyone eat like I didn't exist. Did anyone feel uncomfortable then? Did anyone feel ashamed?" Daniel set his glass down a bit harder than usual. "That was my dad. He grew up in a different time. He didn't mean any harm." "Then what does meaning harm look like?" I walked closer to the table, my voice calm but each word packed with weight. You defend him, but I'm not allowed to react? You went too far, Daniel said through clenched teeth. You turned dinner into a battleground. You embarrassed my dad in front of everyone. I stared at him. If he saw nothing wrong with taking my plate, why did everyone treat it like an insult when I did the same thing in reverse? Daniel didn't answer right away. He leaned on the table, rubbing his temples like he was trying to make sense of things in his own way. That's not how you handle things. You didn't need to retaliate. I clenched my fists. It wasn't retaliation. It was reflection. I showed them what it feels like to be dismissed, to be pushed aside. He looked up at me, his eyes a mix of disappointment and confusion. Karen, you're changing. I gave a faint, bitter smile. No, Daniel. I'm just done pretending to be okay with unfairness. He said nothing. The room filled with the ticking of the wall clock. It sounded like a countdown. From that day on, the distance between us grew. Daniel started leaving for work earlier, coming home later. Whenever I talked to Natalie or his mom on the phone, he always found a reason to leave the room. Every time I brought up what had happened, he pulled away, like avoiding it would make it disappear. One evening, while I was washing glasses, he stood behind me, his voice tired. You talk to Natalie all the time. Are you trying to turn her against Kyle? I set the glass down and turned around. I'm not turning anyone against anyone, but if she needs someone to talk to, I'll listen. Is that so wrong? Daniel shook his head. She's my brother's wife. You shouldn't get involved in other people's marriages. I looked at him for a long moment. And what about me? I'm your wife. Are you getting involved when you let me feel like a stranger in my own home? The question hung in the air. He didn't respond. He just walked out of the kitchen and headed upstairs without looking back. I stood there, hands still soapy, feeling like another piece of this marriage had slipped away. But deep down, I knew. If we didn't confront things, neither of us could save what was left. Daniel wasn't a bad person, but he was someone used to silence. The silence of his mother, his sister-in-law, and now his own. But me? I wasn't born to stay silent forever. And maybe that's what scared him. 3 days after that stormy dinner, I got a call close to 11 p.m. The screen lit up with Natalie. I was surprised. She'd never called this late. Usually just polite thank you texts after family gatherings. I answered right away. Karen. Her voice was so soft I had to press the phone tight to my ear to hear. What's wrong? Are you okay? I asked, sensing something wasn't right. There was silence on the other end. Then Natalie took a deep breath, like she was trying to summon courage. I don't know where to start, but I need to talk to you. Before I convince myself I'm just imagining everything, I sat down on the sofa and turned on the side lamp. I'm listening. I know Mark is controlling my life. Bit by bit, so slowly, I didn't even realize it. Her words hit me hard. I'd always noticed the nervous look in Natalie's eyes, the forced smiles at family dinners. But I never thought she'd open up. Can you tell me more? I said gently. Mark, he doesn't yell, doesn't slam things. He doesn't have to. One look, one frown, and I go silent. I'm not allowed to wear things he doesn't like. He picks out my lipstick. My friends, there are only a few left, and even they hesitate to visit because Mark always gives them a look. And my mother-in-law, she always takes his side. I didn't interrupt. I let her keep going, because maybe this was the first time Natalie had ever spoken the truth out loud. Last week, she said, her voice cracking. When you stood up, took the plate from Bruce and gave it to me, I froze. I'd never seen anyone do something like that. And the weird thing is, I felt relief. Just for a moment. But I imagined being the one who did it. I pressed my lips together, hearing the tremble in her voice. Since then, I've been thinking, am I crazy for seeing that as wrong? Am I selfish for wanting to make my own choices in my own life? No, Natalie, I said firmly. You're not crazy, and you're definitely not selfish. She was quiet, then whispered, I think you're brave. I want to be like you, but I'm scared, really scared. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I knew that fear. It didn't have a clear shape, but it crept into everything. I'd felt it in my own kitchen, when no one stood by me. Do you want to leave? I asked. I don't know. Part of me wants to run right now, but another part thinks, if I do, Mark will tell the whole family I've been influenced by you. That I'm disobedient. That you've poisoned me. You don't have to listen to what they say, I replied. Natalie, you're finally seeing the truth, and that's the only thing that matters. If you need a place to think, to stay, my home is always open to you. No one gets to control your life, not your husband, not your family. No one. She stayed silent for a while, then whispered, Thank you, Karen. I'm not ready to leave yet, but at least I know I'm not alone anymore. I ended the call with a heavy heart. I knew this was just the beginning of a long journey. But when a woman like Natalie, who'd always been quiet, started to speak up, the earthquake had already begun in their family. Slow, but certain. I looked out the window. Moonlight stretched across the lawn. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew that after everything, silence was no longer an option. And I wasn't the only one who realized that anymore. Natalie came to my house on a gloomy Tuesday afternoon, the wind rustling outside, the sky heavy with the threat of rain. She walked in with a pale face, carrying a small suitcase and a tote bag stuffed with a few pieces of clothing. Her eyes were red, but there were no more tears, only exhaustion deep to the bone. I don't know how much longer I can take it, she whispered as I pulled her inside and closed the door behind her. I held her tightly. You don't have to take it anymore. Natalie nodded quietly, then sank into the couch like she'd just escaped a storm. I handed her a glass of water, helped her settle into the guest room, laid out blankets, and left clean pajamas in the drawer. I just went to a law office to ask questions, Natalie said after the simple dinner I'd cooked. Just to ask. But Mark found the brochure in my purse. He went crazy. I stopped washing dishes and turned to look at her. He asked if you'd poisoned me. Then he grabbed my phone, read all the messages. Made me swear I wouldn't talk to you again. I was scared. I knew if I didn't leave right then, I'd lose myself completely. I gently squeezed her hand. You did the right thing, Natalie. We thought we had more time. But just a few hours later, close to 10 p.m., the doorbell rang. Not fast, not slow, but with a chill that sent a shiver through the house. I peeked through the side window. Outside stood Mark, rigid like a statue, his eyes burning. And beside him was Bruce, hands in his pockets, his stare as heavy as the storm-filled sky. I felt Natalie trembling behind me. No way. They found me. I turned to her. You don't have to open the door. You don't owe them any explanation. Richard came out from the bedroom, still in his pajamas. He glanced at the window, his expression shifting from confusion to alertness. What's going on? He asked. I hesitated for a moment. Natalie's staying here. She left Kyle's house tonight. His eyes widened. You let her hide here without telling me? What would you have done if I had? I replied calmly. She needed safety. I don't need your permission to do what's right. He opened his mouth to say something, but the doorbell rang again. This time longer, more forceful. Then came the knocking, louder than before. Mark shouted, Natalie, I know you're in there. Come out and talk. Natalie pressed herself against the wall, lips tightly sealed. Bruce's voice followed, low and heavy. Karen, you should know that when a woman interferes in another family's business, the consequences are never gentle. I tightened my grip on the door handle, trying to stay calm. Richard stepped up and touched my shoulder. I'll talk to them. No, I shook my head. They came here for me. I won't hide behind anyone. I opened the door, letting the porch light fall on Mark's furious face and Bruce's cold stare. Natalie stood behind me, clutching the hem of her shirt. "What do you think you're doing here?" Bruce growled. "Pulling a wife away from her husband? You're destroying this family." I kept my voice steady. "No one is destroying anything. Natalie came here because she needed space to think. No one has the right to force her back to a place that makes her feel afraid." Mark stepped forward, eyes bloodshot. "You're my wife. You can't just disappear like this. She," he pointed at me, "is filling your head with lies." Richard finally spoke from behind me. "Mark, back off." Mark snapped around. "And you? You're letting your wife meddle in someone else's marriage and saying nothing?" Bruce cut in. "Daniel, don't you see she's poisoning this whole family? She's making your brother lose his wife, making your mother stay silent, making you question your own family?" I looked Bruce straight in the eye. If truth can be called poison, then maybe this family's been sick for a long time. Bruce narrowed his eyes, every muscle in his face tense. "My son doesn't need a wife like you." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because behind me, Natalie stepped forward, her voice shaky but clear. "If your family can't accept that I have the right to think and choose for myself, then maybe I don't belong in it anymore." Mark looked at Natalie like something he owned had just been taken from him. His face turned red, lips tight, his eyes no longer angry but shocked. Bruce stood beside his son, silent for a second before stepping forward, his voice sharp as a blade. "What did you just say?" Natalie took a deep breath. For the first time, she didn't hide behind me. She didn't avoid her husband's gaze. She didn't bow her head out of fear. I said, "I'm getting a divorce." Her voice wasn't loud, but each word landed with the weight of truth in the tense air on my porch. Bruce let out a short, bitter laugh. "No woman in this family gets divorced. You're Mark's wife. It's your duty to hold the family together, not tear it apart." Natalie didn't flinch. "I tried, for years. But a family can't survive when one person is being suffocated every single day." Mark clenched his fists, stepped forward. "You don't get to make that decision on your own." "I've been silent for too long, Mark," Natalie replied, her voice trembling slightly but not breaking. "Now I'm making decisions for myself." Bruce turned to Richard, searching for support. "Don't you see? This is what happens when women think they can do whatever they want. You need to leave this house before you're dragged down too." I stood still, waiting. I knew this moment would come. The choice. The truth. Richard looked around. His eyes passed over Natalie, then stopped at me. The whole house held its breath. I said nothing. No pleading, no convincing. This wasn't my battle anymore. This was his. "I'm not going anywhere," Richard said, slow but firm. Bruce's eyes widened, stunned. "What did you just say?" Richard took a deep breath, as if pulling the words from somewhere long buried. "I've stayed silent too long, let things happen unchecked. But tonight, when I saw Natalie's eyes, when I saw how you looked at my wife, I realized something." He turned to me, eyes filled with clarity. "Karen isn't destroying this family. She's just exposing the cracks that were already there." Bruce growled. "She's turning you against your own father." Richard replied, his voice steady now. "You turned your back on respect a long time ago. I'm just stepping out of the darkness." Mark stared, stunned that his own brother had said those words in front of Bruce. Natalie let out a long breath, as if releasing a weight she'd carried for years. Bruce turned away, his face flushed with fury. "If you leave this family, don't expect to come back." Richard didn't respond, but his eyes were steady, unshaken. I stepped forward, stood beside him, and gently took his hand. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't let go. Mark stepped back, his eyes lost. Bruce growled. "Let's go." No one saw them out. No goodbyes. Just the slam of a car door and the fading taillights disappearing into the night. When the dust settled, the house fell completely silent. Natalie sank into the couch, her hands covering her face. I handed her a glass of water and gently placed my hand on her shoulder. Richard still stood there, staring at the window where his father's car had vanished. I walked over to him and asked softly, "Are you okay?" He didn't answer right away. After a moment, he said quietly, "I don't know. I lost something tonight, but at the same time, I feel like I found something else. You. And the truth." I nodded. "It won't be easy, but it's a beginning." That night, we didn't sleep much, but in that silence, there was no more distance, no more truths hidden in half-spoken words. Everything was clear now, painful, but real. And I knew that every storm eventually passes, as long as you're not standing alone in the wind. 3 months after that night, Natalie officially filed for divorce. She found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood about 15 minutes' drive from my house. The walls were painted cream and the windows looked out onto a row of maple trees just beginning to turn. The first time I visited, Natalie stood in the middle of her empty living room, holding a small potted plant, smiling softly. A real smile, not forced, not cautious. "I know it's not big," she said, "but I feel like I can breathe here." She started going to therapy regularly each week. Some days she'd come over with red eyes, but every time she left, her steps were steadier. Natalie was no longer the woman who apologized with every breath. She was learning to speak her mind, not for anyone's approval, but to remind herself she had the right to do so. As for my mother-in-law, Linda, she quietly disappeared just 2 weeks after Bruce stormed out of the house in anger. One evening, Richard received a message from an unknown number with just a few lines. "I'm okay. I just need some space." We later found out she was living in a small coastal town in Oregon, renting a simple home and working part-time at a local bookstore. When Richard called her, for the first time in years, I saw him truly listen. Linda said she didn't know how long she'd been enduring things, only that when Natalie stood up, she finally started looking at herself. "Maybe I should have left long ago," she said. "But at least now, I'm starting over. It's not too late, is it?" Richard couldn't answer. But after that call, he sat quietly on the balcony for nearly an hour, saying nothing. When I brought him a cup of hot tea, he looked up at me, his eyes red. "I let everything pass like it was just the way things were," he said. "But you weren't afraid to be misunderstood, to speak up for what's right." I held his hand. No words were needed. The change in Richard didn't happen overnight. Growing up in the shadow of a dominant father doesn't disappear in one evening. But I could see his effort, in the way he stopped interrupting when I spoke, in how he asked for my thoughts before making joint decisions, in the times he stepped into the kitchen and said, "Let me cook today." We started over, not from zero, but from a new foundation: respect. One early spring evening, when tulips began blooming in the backyard, Richard sat beside me on the wooden bench. He held my hand and smiled. "I used to think I'd lost my family, but it turns out I only lost what was fake." I rested my head on his shoulder, gazing up at the sky tinted gold. "We don't have to hold on to what suffocates us just to call it family." A gentle breeze swept through, and in that moment, I felt truly free. My home was no longer a place where I held my breath walking into the kitchen or tiptoed around judgmental stairs. It was a place where Natalie sometimes dropped by with freshly baked cookies, where Richard and I cooked together, read together, shared peaceful silence together. And I, Karen, was no longer the woman sitting and waiting for a plate of food in her own home. I was the one who reset the table, made space for myself, and opened more seats for women who had always been told to stand in the back. We didn't just find fairness. We found ourselves again. From my story, I realized that silence is never the solution when facing injustice. Sometimes, to change a system that's outdated and broken, you have to be brave enough to speak up, even if it means facing opposition from those closest to you. I didn't just reclaim my own voice. I helped the other women in my family find theirs too. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: respect is not something given. It's something you must claim for yourself. What do you think about Karen's story and her choices? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt and powerful stories about family and life.